Welcome to Build Series. I'm your host, Lauren Muraski. You may know Andrew McMahon from the band Something Corporate and Jack's Mannequin, but in 2013, Andrew released his first solo effort and has been busy ever since. Now he's gearing up to unveil his third studio album, Upside Down Flowers, on November 16th, and he joins us now to talk all about it. Please, everyone, welcome Andrew McMahon to the Build stage.
Thank you, thank you.
Andrew, we're in for a real exciting thing today because not only are we doing a Q&A for a bit, you're also going to perform. So
Yes.
we're really excited about that.
We brought some gear. We're going to do some songs for you guys. Yeah.
And just a little hint, I saw some of the sound check and I heard some of that and it sounds great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, we've been working hard trying to get the acoustic songs really feeling good so we can do some of these performances.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on the new record. It's awesome. And I've heard, you say that it's your most personal yet. And, a lot of people, say that, like they write about their personal feelings and personal experiences, but why do you think that this one really gets to the heart of like what you're about right now?
Well, I probably say that every record, so I'm going to be very clear about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think for me on this album, I just approached it in a completely different way than I have been approaching making music for a while now, which is, I've been on the road and toured the last two records, wrote, recorded, toured, sort of 2014 on, and so I kind of came back. I came back last year from that process and found myself with like more time on my hands, which is something I had not experienced in like 3 or 4 years. And instead of doing what I maybe would have been recommended, which is just like, hey, maybe veg out for a little bit and chill. I just built a writing practice where I would wake up every day and kind of just drift into my little studio in the back, and I'd work and write throughout the day and check back in with the family, do dinner, you know what I mean, and do all those things. But it was sort of threaded through my life in a way that that I haven't been able to do, and it was a huge luxury, and it got written so quickly, and I feel like the songs in that sense like really came from a visceral place and a kind of a primal place where it was like the first thought in my head and my subconscious in the morning was the thing I wrote about that day, and that's what turned into this record.
You sing about Ohio.
do.
There's a song called Ohio on the record that I really enjoy,
Yes.
and that's when you lived there for a hot second.
Yeah.
And before you moved to California with your family.
That's right. I was there until, gosh, it was like 11 or 12. I was there for 3 years. So when you're 11 or 12, 3 years feels like a good chunk of your life. And yeah, we ended up kind of packing everything up fairly last minute and getting out of town. And our escape was California and sort of in sort of a poetic and beautiful way, and not an easy way necessarily. We sort of started our lives over as a family on the West Coast, and in a lot of ways, it was the best decision that was ever made, not necessarily by me, but by my family, because California is my heart and soul now. It's just such a huge part of who I am.
Do you feel like Ohio is part of who you are in some way, shape, or form, or is it more about the leaving?
No. I mean, I love Ohio. I lived in Columbus and had, still have good friends that live out there. And I think we have these places in our lives and in the narratives that become how we see our lives and the story that we're telling that maybe aren't always the easiest, but you wouldn't have a full life without them, and you wouldn't have gotten to the next thing if you didn't face some adversity. And there was definitely some of that in that move, but it shaped who I was and led me to a town where I could meet a band and start making rock and roll music for a living. So not so bad.
And the rest is history, right?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
You also sing about some of the rock and roll legends that have gone by, who have passed. I mean, particularly Tom Petty was an inspiration for one of your songs.
Of course.
Can you talk a little bit about that song and how maybe their music infuses your music, or even just that song in general?
Yeah, when I wrote the first lyrics for Goodnight Rock and Roll, the first line was, I'm running out of time, but I'm not running. And I think it's, for me, as a guy who has been in this business a long time, there's always this strange sense that like somebody is about to just like knock you out of your place or whatever, low-level throne I may sit on, I'm trying to defend it still. And it started like that, but I quickly found myself thinking about my heroes who had hung on to that sort of piece of the crown for so long and managed to still make great music. And it was right in right around the time that Petty had passed away, and he has just been such a huge part of my my study as a writer, as somebody who honors tries to look at people who've done this right over the years. And he was so I don't want to say shrewd in the way he handled his business, but he handled himself and he comported himself in such a what seemed like a dignified way. And I loved his songs. And so when he passed, I mean, for so many people, obviously, but I remember it hit myself and my peer group and our friends. I remember the phone calls that went out. It was just like, oh my gosh, how is this, like Petty and Prince and Bowie all within a matter of years? And especially in the case of Petty and Bowie, they were so important to me coming up as a writer that I wanted to pay some respect on my own, of my own. And it became like a pretty clear path. I was going to write a song to sort of like just look back at the legends that have, helped me and informed my process of growth as a writer.
So much great music there.
Yeah,
I mean, so yeah, lots of inspiration to pull from and sort of pay tribute to.
Of course, yeah.
You also kind of pay tribute to your own past in the lead song on the record, throwing back to when you were a young musician, because you got started very young.
Yeah.
What was it like sort of throwing back to your own, when you got your start, you had early success with the bands, and sort of singing about that time period in your life?
Well, it's funny because I've tried to do it a couple of times. There was another song I worked on in the Jack's Mannequin era called "Starting a Rock Band," and it didn't. It was what this song became. What I sort of always saw that song being, but I think I was still kind of caught up in whatever it was that the machinations of how I got from point A to point B, making music in the different incarnations that I have with Teenage Rockstars. That's the name of the song. With that one, it felt more fun. It was like, I can look back at this without judging it. I can look back at this and see what was beautiful about it, and not maybe some of the things that stung a little bit or didn't feel so great at the time. And I spent quite a bit of time over the years, these past several years, with members of something corporate, and Bobby from Jack's Mannequin just joined back up with us to do this record, and I just found myself going like, this is something beautiful. I can sing about this, and it can be a little tongue-in-cheek and talk about, these kind of silly things that happen when you are like a young kid in a rock and roll band on tour. But I felt like there was a sense of duty to make it come to life for people and to honor it.
It really kicks off the record in a good way. So
Thanks.
I feel like you did it justice after all this time.
Appreciate it.
With the recording process for this, are you a lot of the time recording at home and have your own home studio? How's that work for you?
I do. I almost never use it. I'm like, I was told by a really awesome producer who I respect a lot years ago, kind of when I was starting the process of doing solo work, where he just said, do what you do best. At that moment, he felt like in the room that I was in, he wanted me to write a really great lyric for an artist. And I've kind of carried that with me. And so, yes, I have recording gear, but just about every time I start recording something, I say to myself, this is not what you do best. Sit down, write the song, and write it all the way through. So that was really, I have a studio, I have a space, but I'm a voice memo guy for the most part, so I'll try and, the big thing is getting through the chorus for me and doing that as quickly as possible. So like, just putting the architecture of a great verse and a pre-chorus and a chorus and a post, kind of getting all those things feeling good, and then I can step back. And a lot of times I'll send it off to my manager and be like, what do you think of this? And that's kind of how this process began. I voice memoed all these tunes. Some of them didn't have bridges, but there were enough songs put together that I was like, let's hit up Butch. I love Butch Walker. He's kind of an old friend, even though we weren't really friends. We just think of ourselves as old friends. We'd only met once before, I think, technically, but we, in circles, would be like, oh, I love that guy. And I think we both said it enough times about each other that that we were under the impression we had spent a lot more time together than we actually had. But I had enough songs, and we sent him up to Butch, and he was really into him. He said, just come up. And so I'd show up with a couple of tunes, play the piano, sing, get a couple of good vocal performances, and half the time I'd either just go sit in the other room and let him, dive in and build a production or a start, or I would go home and go back the next day, and then we would just edit whatever he had done and finish the songs. So So yeah, that's how it happened. I wrote him at the house, and then Butch just knocked him out of the park in his studio.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, he's worked with so many great people. It
He's
seems
great.
like you have like a good connection that kind of fused together to make what we hear on this record. So
Totally, yeah, he's awesome.
that's really cool. You became a dad in the last few years. I know, you know, Cecilia is like the inspiration behind the song.
Yeah.
How much does being a dad change kind of your perspective in life and if in your music, even now, like now a few years later?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's priorities is the easiest way to say it. You have to live less selfishly. I mean, there really is no other way about it. I think for me as an artist, it's figuring out that balance of like making sure I'm always available to honor that whatever that next song is or whatever the emotion is that's welling up that needs to sort of be sorted out through art. So for me, it's really been about that journey of finding out how to do those two things at the same time. And usually what it means is cutting out a lot of the like just otherness, the things that maybe were distractions before and were fun ways to fill time that now I have a great family and I have, a craft that I love and I just basically do those two things.
Yeah. Oh, and you're on the road. You're doing that thing too.
That's a part of the thing, yeah. And they travel with me quite a bit.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
How's that work out?
Sometimes great and sometimes not. Like potty training a kid on a tour bus is an adventure that I don't recommend to everybody. But it really, there are very hard days.
Yeah.
But raising a kid anywhere on earth is hard. So we've sort of taken the tack that if we can, being together when it's hard is better than being apart when maybe it's a little easier. So it's a lot of fun. She's got a bunch of little, or she's got a bunch of like road uncles and the band and crew have seen her grow up since she was 6 months. She's been riding on that bus with us and it's really, it's charmed in that sense. Like I think I'll look back on this period of time in my life when I got to take my baby on the road with me and my wife and raise her between home and a tour bus and I think I'll look back very fondly on this time.
What a great experience for her, I think, just like getting an education, like, on the road education.
And she's been to like every children's museum in America at this point. And she, as a result, it's like we can take her to a restaurant and we can do, she's able to interact in a pretty high level for a 4-year-old, because she sort of had to, but I think she really enjoys it. I mean, she regularly says like, when are we going to go back on tour? Like if we've been off for a while. So so far so good.
That's awesome. So when you're about to, create your set list, I mean, having been in the industry for such a long time, how do you create this balance of new and old
right.
and, touching on the nostalgia of, your previous work with your previous bands and sort of like infusing some of your new solo work in that? Because you have fans from,
right.
probably like following you from years and years ago.
Well, I think it's, there's a lot of levels to how I go about it. I think the first thing that I try to do primarily is make new good music. I think that it becomes a lot trickier if you make records that your fans don't like now and would much prefer hearing your older records. Yeah. That becomes a little bit more difficult. And so I try really hard to hold myself to account to keep pushing and keep making music that feels relevant and exciting and fresh for me, and hopefully it does for them. So that's the first thing. So you do want to support what you've put out. I think that's a big point. You want to go out and not just be a nostalgia act, and that's an easy thing to be and to become. And I've fought against that really hard, and I've been so fortunate to have fans that have actually walked that walk with me and have been supportive of my new music. But I love playing the hits, so to speak. And I love playing songs that people want to hear, So you really just have to look at your set list. You look at what you did the last time you were in town or the last tour you were out and try and, especially with the older songs, change what's rotating into the catalog so that people who come to see you regularly still get a new show. And yeah, I mean, I tend to look at it like, somewhat of like a 60-40, 60% in the newish realm, but another, 40 to 45, you start pulling from other records and other eras.
You've established yourself, with your first name out there, last name out there as a solo act. I mean, how tempting or not tempting is it for you to get the bands back together and sort of because you're in touch with the guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because all of Jack's Mannequin is on tour or is on stage with me. It's not that's not a hard. The band's back together.
Yeah, exactly, right.
So that's not that tough. I mean, admittedly, I consider myself something of a modernist. I like the idea of staying present and moving towards the future, and I try not to spend so much time thinking about, oh, what if I revived this or whatever. The thoughts get kicked around, but all of my former bandmates, they have lives and real, and real jobs and families and things that coordinating schedules like that is, it's hard to be hey, can you tell your law firm that we're going on tour for a couple of months? You know what I mean? These are not easy hurdles to go over. But we've had a handful of occasions, like Dear Jack benefit one year. I had all 3 bands there, which for me was a head spinning. I couldn't figure out where I was in my life and where I was in my catalog and all that stuff. But yeah, I think the priority for me is to keep making new music and keep playing with this amazing band that I have, playing the songs that people know and love from those eras. I definitely don't want to deprive people or myself of getting to revisit songs that mean quite a bit to me and hopefully to them as well.
You mentioned a Dear Jack benefit. That's your organization, goes towards your organization. So not everybody knows, but you had leukemia, right?
That's right,
And you're about 12 years or so?
13 this summer.
13 years
Yeah.
this summer.
Yeah.
And you're feeling good?
Feel great.
And can you talk a little bit about your mission and what you try to do with the organization now?
Yeah, so Dear Jack kind of came on the heels of my leukemia diagnosis and what was effectively a remission within the first year, which I was incredibly fortunate and realized that I had an opportunity with my platform to take what I was doing, and explain my story and share that and hopefully generate some money and some dollars and awareness. Our particular mission is focused on what you call AYA cancer, adolescent and young adult cancer. So that's people ages 15 to 39 years of age. So it's a pretty wide spread there, and it's also if you think about the things that happen between age 15 and 39, so much of our lives are unfolding in this pivotal moment, and yet this is the most underserved demographic of cancer patients. So we have 2 amazing programs, one called The Life List, where we work with patients and their families in the hospital to develop basically lists of whether it's an item they want to get or a place they want to go to, basically things they want to accomplish while they're in treatment to keep them not just focused on what their next therapy is going to be or their next day in the hospital, but what's something they can look forward to that's going to make it a little bit easier. That program's been incredible. It's expanded doubly each year for the last 3 years. And then we have another program called Breathe Now, where we do a couples retreat. So 6 couples. It's basically somebody who's just survived, somebody about first year in remission to third year in remission, and their spouse or their partner. What people don't realize when you're ill, it's not just you that gets sick. Your family gets sick with you. Your advocates are so overlooked. It's always about the guy in the hospital or the guy in that bed. You want to get them well. What you don't realize is that their partner is suffering along with them, and often suffering more because there's really nothing there for them to help them cope because they have to hold it all together. And so Breathe Now is an initiative that we started where we're getting these couples into a really healthy environment, yoga, great eating, beautiful environments with a social worker, and we start talking about what it is to live a life post-cancer, not just for the survivor, but also for their partner.
Incredible work.
Thank
Keep
you.
up the good work with that.
Thank you very much.
We have some questions from the fans here.
I love it. Let's do it.
Let's get to it. Who's
Sure.
first? Right here.
Hi, from Ohio.
I love it.
What is upside down flowers? Where did you get it from? Is it something Cecilia maybe said?
The idea of an upside down flower to me is really, in a way, a reference to the characters that pop up on this record, and in a sense, the characters in my life, and this idea that to be beautiful can mean a lot of things, but to be truly beautiful, I think you have to be a little bit backwards, and a little strange, and finding beauty in sort of. Whether it's heartbreak or just something odd, and I think this idea of an upside down flower, it's this beautiful thing that, that just isn't quite right, you know.
Thanks for that question. Who's next?
Hi.
Hey, my friend.
Hi. So I'm curious about your writing process as a musician. Do you usually start with a melody and then do lyrics, or do you tend to write lyrics before melody? What is that like for you?
I'll give you like the general, like probably what is maybe 60 to 70% of the way that I write, which is I sit down at the piano as early in the morning as I can, because I tend to find that like whatever that dream fog or whatever that you're kind of breaking through can often lead to that stream of consciousness or whatever you were thinking about in your sleep. And I just put my hands on the keys and I start making sound, start playing the piano, and then if I find something that feels like it's fresh and it's a new idea, then I start singing over the top of that. And maybe then a melody comes, and then you start finding a word or two that makes sense. Or there's something in my journal that I really wanted to say this, and you start plugging those words in. But generally speaking, it's everything at once for me, and then I just try and chase it and move it along fast enough so you don't get so caught up in the first thing that you blow up a great idea before it actually sees, a conclusion. Yeah, no problem.
Cool. Thanks for that question. And we have time for one more question before the performance, right here.
Hi, I'm from Massachusetts.
Hello. I was from Massachusetts too. Look, here we go. It's perfect.
All the hometown.
Yeah, I love that.
So you have a lot of songs in your catalog at this point. What would you say is your favorite performing live? No, it's a tough
Favorite
one.
to perform live? Well, I mean, selfishly for me, there have been a couple songs throughout sets in the last year or so where I've been able to ride an enormous inflatable duck across the hands of the audience. So it's pretty much any song that I'm doing that on. So currently that's Don't Speak for Me off the last record, and La 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 by Jack's Mannequin off the Everything in Transit album. It doesn't really speak to, I think, why you're asking me this question, but it's the answer I could come up with at this time.
Thanks for that question. Well, you'll be on tour. The
Yes.
album's out November 16th.
Yes.
And don't go too far because Andrew's going to be performing right on this stage in just a few. So give it up one more time for Andrew McMahon.
Thank you so much.